Good morning. How is everyone doing today? This morning we are going to read through chapter 14 of Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. If this is your first time watching, this is not a typical reading. We're not just going to read the words. We're going to talk about all of the interesting vocabulary and phrases that we find as we read. So it's a good way to improve your vocabulary, your English vocabulary, or it's a good way to improve your understanding of English because we will talk about phrases that aren't always clear to people learning English. If you're watching this live with me, then I encourage you to make questions. Ask me questions as we go. That's what makes the video interesting. If you don't ask questions, I will just pause when I think there's an interesting word for you or an interesting phrase for you, and we will talk about it. All right, well, let's start reading chapter 14 of Brave New World. We're getting very close to the end of the book. I think there are only 280 pages, if I remember correctly, so I think we might be very close to the end. All right, the Park Lane Hospital for the Dying was a 60-story tower of primrose tiles. As the savage stepped up out of his taxicopter, a convoy of gaily colored aerial hearses rose whirring from the roof and darted away across the park. Okay. Well, you know that gay means happy, so gaily colored means in happy colors. And a hearse is, let me show you a picture of a hearse, is a vehicle used for transporting a dead body. So this is a modern hearse. Well, this is a gaily colored, literally. On many levels, that is a gaily colored hearse. At the lift gates, the presiding porter gave him the information he required, and he dropped down to Ward 81. You know, that's funny. I was talking to a student of mine last week about well, let's see. Let's practice this for a minute since it's come up. Let me see if I can remember how to write on here. All right. Here is a word that you know. I'm sure you know this. If you're watching this, I'm sure you already know this word. You might not, maybe you don't know this other word, though, which can be used in several different ways. But here what it means is part of a hospital. A section of the hospital. You know, you can have like the baby ward or the cancer ward. It just means an area of the hospital. In Chicago, where I grew up, the political districts of the city are divided by wards. So it's like an area. Ward means kind of like area. But it's interesting because, you know, how do you say number one? How can you try to say number one? How do you pronounce that, number one? That's word. So that's just one little sound. It's word. That sound in the middle is word. But to pronounce number two, you have to make that sound, erd, but you also have to make a wo sound. So this is wo-erd. Number two is wo-erd. Ward, ward. That's number two. And number one is word, word. So number two has an extra sound, an O sound, ward. That's an area of a hospital or in a district in a city. And then you have number one, word. It's just one sound in there. Word. Number 2, ward. Okay, I just thought that I would share that with you since it came up. And I was just talking about that with someone. Okay. Let's see. At the lift gates, he's presiding of the presiding porter gave him the information he required, and he dropped down to Ward 81. So he's at some kind of building like a hospital, and as I said, hospitals are many times divided into wards. And he has to go to Ward 81, which is probably the 81st floor. A galloping senility ward, the porter explained. I don't know why they're using galloping here. Maybe it means progressing fastly. Let me show you what gallop means. Senility is what happens to older people when they start to lose their memory. That's being senile or having senility. But galloping is how, for example, a horse runs. So this is galloping. So I can only guess that galloping senility means old people who are losing their memory very quickly or progressively. But I don't really know why they use that term. Oh, well, let's see what Google says. Maybe there's a real answer for that. Galloping. I've never heard that before. Galloping senility. What is galloping senility? Everyone remains young-looking through chemical treatments until at 60 death comes in the form of galloping senility, a rapid deterioration of mental and physical powers. And it looks like this is just a term used in this book, because when I Google galloping senility, I get references only to this book. So people take drugs and they have operations and they look beautiful until they're 60, and then suddenly, very quickly, everything becomes very old. Maybe not on the outside, but on the inside. Okay, so Ward 81 actually is on the 17th floor. It was a large room with bright sunshine and yellow paint, and containing 20 beds, all occupied. Linda was dying in company and with all the modern conveniences. The air was continuously alive with gay synthetic melodies. At the foot of every bed, confronting its moribund occupant. Moribund. We better look at that word, moribund. I've seen that before. That's not a word that you would use in conversation. Wait, moribund. I forgot to get rid of senility, so I was looking for moribund senility. Wait, moribund. On the point of death. In a terminal decline. So, why were they using that word here? Linda was dying in company with all the modern conveniences, with the air continuously alive and gay with synthetic melodies. At the foot of every bed, confronting its moribund occupant. So, at the foot of every bed, every occupant who is dying sees this thing. Was a television box. Television was left on. A running tap from morning till night. Every quarter of an hour, the prevailing perfume of the room was automatically changed. We try, explained the nurse, who had taken charge of the savage at the door. We try to create a thoroughly. Thoroughly means complete, like 100%. That's a pretty common word that people, even fairly advanced people, sometimes are not familiar with that word, thoroughly. But it's a pretty common word, and it means 100% or very complete. We try to create a thoroughly pleasant atmosphere. Something between a first-class hotel and a feely palace, if you take my meaning. "Where is she?" asked the savage, ignoring these polite explanation. The nurse was offended. "You're in a hurry," she said. "Is there any hope? You mean of her not dying?" He nodded. "No, of course there isn't. When somebody's sent here, there's no..." Startled by the expression of distress on his pale face, she suddenly broke off. "Why, whatever is the matter?" she asked. She was not accustomed to this kind of thing in visitors. Sorry, I lost my place. Not that there were many visitors anyhow, or any reason why there should be many visitors. You're not feeling ill, are you? He shook his head. "She's my mother," he said in a scarcely audible voice. Audible means you can hear. So you always see that word audio, which means hearing. So audible means can hear. And so if it's scarcely audible, that means you can't really hear it. "She's my mother." That's scarcely audible. The nurse glanced at him with a startled, horrified face, and then quickly looked away. From throat to temple, she was all one hot blush. Remember here that mother is like a swear word. It's like a horrible thing to be a mother. And so she's offended when he says mother. Wellington Cardoso is here. Good morning, Wellington. How are you doing today? "Take me to her," said the savage, making an effort to speak in an ordinary tone. Still blushing, she led the way down the ward. Faces, still fresh and unwithered from senility. For senility galloped so hard that it had no time to age the cheeks. Only the heart and brain. So we've had this word withered before. Let me show you the difference. It's a good word to know, I think. And withered is the way that you talk about flowers or vegetables, or mainly flowers or vegetables, probably. So if you look at the first picture, the flower on the left is withered. It looks like it's dying. And the blue flower on the right looks fresh and beautiful. Same thing with the red flower. The red flower on the left looks alive and beautiful, but the flower on the right is withering. It looks like it's dying. So you can have also withered vegetables. Let's see. What happens if I look for withered vegetables? See, you would not go to the market and buy this lettuce, would you? Because it's withering. It looks like it's dying. And that's mainly how you talk about withered, is when you're looking at flowers or vegetables and you can see that they're dying. They don't look healthy. But you can apply that to people as well. You can say a person is withering, but that means that it looks like they're dying. Heidi says, good evening. Good evening, Heidi. How are you doing today? Heidi says, are withering and wilting the same? They're very similar. Let me see. I have to ask. That's a good question. I'm going to ask ChatGPT what it thinks, because honestly I don't know. Wilted. Maybe wilted is more about the appearance and withered is more about the fact that it's dying. But let me see. Let's see what ChatGPT says. Related terms. Wilted generally refers to a temporary condition. Oh, yeah, that's I didn't think about that, but yes, I think that's true. Wilted seems temporary. So if you have a wilted flower, maybe if you give it some water or some love, it will come back to life. But when you say withered, that means it's in the process of dying. It looks unhealthy and it's going to die and you can't change it. So that would be the difference. But I don't think most people would even know that difference. I didn't know the difference until now. All right. So let's go back and reread that now that we understand the word withered. The face is still fresh and unwithered. So that means they're dying, but you don't see the death in their faces. Their faces are unwithered. They don't look like they're dying. They look healthy and nice. For senility galloped so hard that it had no time to age the cheeks, only the heart and brain. So they die internally, but they look beautiful from the outside. Turned as they passed, their progress was followed by the blank, incurious eyes of second infancy. The savage shuddered as he looked. Shuddering, we've had that word many times. Ooh, that's a shudder. Linda was lying in the last of the long row of beds next to the wall. Propped up on pillows, she was watching the semifinals of the South American Ryman Surface Tennis Championship, which were being played in silent and diminished reproduction on the screen of the television box at the foot of the bed. Hither and thither. That means these are kind of old expressions. You don't have to worry about using hither and thither. You'll only see that in old books. People don't talk like that anymore, and if you try to use it, you'll sound strange. But hither means to here, and thither means to there. So here and there. It's like an old way of saying here and there. Hither and thither across the square of illumined glass, and little figures noiselessly darted like fish in an aquarium, the silent but agitated inhabitants of another world. Linda looked on, vaguely and uncomprehendingly smiling, her pale, bloated face. Bloat, it means like full of water. So if you're bloated, if your face is bloated, your face looks fat, but it's temporary, because it's not that your face is fat, it's just that you're holding a lot of water. So your face looks fatter than usual. You can use it for food too. If you eat a very, very big dinner, your stomach will feel bloated for maybe the next day or the next 12 hours. You'll feel extra fat, but it's temporary. That's what bloating is about. Bloating is about not having fat, but holding food or water and making you temporarily big. So if her face looked bloated, it could be because she's having a medical problem and her body cannot lose water, so her face looks fatter than normal. Or maybe she's taking some kind of medication that makes her hold water, so her face looks fat. But it's not fat, it's water or something else. Her pale, bloated face wore an expression of imbecile happiness. Imbecile means like idiot. Somebody who isn't smart, like extremely not smart. Every now and then her eyelids closed, and for a few seconds she seemed to be dozing. Then with a little start, she would wake up to the aquarium antics of the tennis champions and the Supervox Wurlitzerania rendering of "Hug me till you drug me, honey," to the warm draft of verbena that came blowing through the ventilator above her head. Would make these would wake to these things, or rather to a dream of which these things transformed and embellished by the soma in her blood system were the marvelous constituents, and smile once more her broken and discolored smile of infantile contentment. "Well, I must go," said the nurse. "I've got my batch of children coming. Besides, there's number 3. You know, batch is a funny word. Batch is like a group. What's the difference, though, between batch and group? Let's see, a quantity or consignment of goods produced at one time, arranged in sets or groups. So, if you make cookies, you never make one cookie. You always make 12 or 24 cookies at one time, and that is a batch of cookies. Same with bread. If you're making bread, you never make one bread, you always make several, because it's a lot of trouble to make the dough, and it takes a long time. So you make bread in groups, and you call those batches. So when you produce something in a group, you call them batches. And she's saying, I have to take care of a batch of babies, because they produce babies not one at a time, but several at a time. And that's why it's called a batch. "I've got my batch of children coming. Besides, there's number 3. She pointed up the ward. "Might go off any minute now. Well, make yourself comfortable," she said, and walked briskly away. The savage sat down beside the bed. "Linda," he whispered, taking her hand at the sound of her name. She turned. Her vague eyes brightened with recognition. She squeezed his hand and smiled. Her lips moved. And then quite suddenly her head fell forward. She was asleep. He sat watching her, seeking through the tired flesh, seeking and finding that young, bright face which had stooped over his childhood in Malpais. Wellington says in Portuguese, imbecile without the E is imbecile. Means idiot too, but with a, idiota. Yeah. So those words are pretty universal, I think, in most European languages. Imbecile, idiot. So that's good to know. You can, if you speak Portuguese, it's easy to insult someone in English if you want, and vice versa. Okay, remembering, and her eyes closed, her voice, her movements, and the events of her life together. Streptocock G to Banbury T. How beautiful her singing had been. And those childish rhymes, how magically strange and mysterious. A, B, C, vitamin D. The fats in the liver, the cods in the sea. He felt hot tears welling up behind his eyelids as he recalled the words and Linda's voice as she repeated them. And then the reading lessons. The tot is in the pot. The cat is on the mat. The elementary instructions for beta workers in the embryo store. And long evenings by the fire, or in summertime on the roof of the little house when she told him those stories about the other place outside the reservation. That beautiful, beautiful other place, whose memory as of a heaven, a paradise of goodness and loveliness, he still kept whole and intact. Undelified by contact with the reality of this real London, these actual civilized men and women. Let's take a look at this word, undelified. Undelified, what does that mean? Not corrupt, not impure, not unclean. So let's see. How do they use that word here? This is not a word that you have to worry about using, though. I just don't know what it means. He still kept whole and intact, undelified by contact with the reality of this real London. So he's been in civilization for a while, but it hasn't changed him. He's still pure. He's still a savage in his heart. A sudden noise of shrill voices made him open his eyes, and after hastily brushing away tears, looked round the room to what seemed to be an interminable stream of identical 8-year-old male twins was pouring into the room. Twin after twin, twin after twin. They came, a nightmare. Their faces, their repeated face, for there was only one between a lot of them. Their faces, their repeated face, for there was only one between the lot of them. So what he means is they're all twins, so they all have the same face, which is really weird because it's this very large group. It said an interminable group. And you know the word terminate, which means finish. Terminable means can finish, and interminable means never finishes. So an interminable group of boys. So it seems like a group of boys with no finish, no end, and they all have the same face. Recuerdos says good morning and says your coffee mug is cool. Thank you, Recuerdos. I don't know what's so cool about it. What do you think is cool about it? It's pretty big. Their faces repeated, for there was only one between the lot of them, puggishly stared. Pug, we've had that in... Well, I'm doing David Copperfield sometimes at night. I'm reading that book online, live, also. And we just had a scene where an old man was described as a pug. It's a type of dog. I'm not sure how they're using it here. You could see it if they're talking about an old man, an old British man, saying if he had a black nose, he would look just like a pug. That's how it was said in David Copperfield. But here the children are puggishly staring, and I just wonder if pug has some other meaning. I doubt it. But let's see. Let's check. Puggishly meaning. Let's see if that means anything. It just means resembling a pug, resembling a dog, a pug dog. I've lost my place now. Okay, I'm just going to start here because I can't find my place anymore. So I'm rereading something. Instructions for beta workers in the embryo store and long evenings by the fire in summertime. On the roof of the little house, when she told him those stories of the other place outside the reservation, the beautiful, beautiful place, the beautiful, beautiful other place, whose memory as of a heaven, a paradise of goodness and loveliness, he still kept whole and intact, undefiled. I was reading that wrong. Okay, that makes sense. Undefiled, not undelified. I was just reading it wrong. Undefiled. To defile something means to make it dirty or bad. So if you defile something, you have somehow made it unclean or not usable anymore. It's too dirty, too polluted. So undefiled means that you remain pure. A sudden noise of shrill voices made him open his eyes, and after hastily brushing away the tears, look round what seemed to be an interminable stream of identical 8-year-old male twins was pouring into the room. Twin after twin after twin, they came, a nightmare. Their faces, their repeated face, for there was only one between the lot of them, puggishly stared, all nostrils and pale, goggling eyes. And their uniform was khaki, and their mouths hung open, squealing and chattering as they entered. In a moment, it seemed that the ward was maggoty with them. He says goggly eyes, but I think that I would say googly eyes, like Google. Googly eyes. Let me show you if I can find googly eyes. And I think it means the same thing, but I don't really know. Don't they have these toys? No. You can usually find googly eye toys for children. Let me put toy. Okay, this is a good example. These are googly eyes. The eyes move around like this. And then it mentions maggots. Let me show you a picture of maggots. He says the room was maggoty with these children. So a maggot is, probably you recognize this. It's like a baby fly, a baby insect. So the room was maggoty with these children. There were so many of them. And it was not a pleasant experience to have them around. Their faces and pale, goggling eyes. Their uniform was khaki. All their mouths hung open. They swarmed between the ward. Squealing and chattering, they entered in a moment. It seemed the ward was maggoty with them. They swarmed between the beds, clambered over them, crawled under, peeped into the television boxes, made faces at the patients. To make faces at the patients means to wear a specific expression on your face. So it's hard to know exactly what kind of faces they were making. Maybe they were curious. Maybe they were making fun of them. Making faces, it's hard to know exactly what they were doing. So maybe they were curious. But they had very special expressions on their face, all of them. Linda, astonished and rather alarmed them. A group stood clustered in the foot of her bed, staring with her the frightened and stupid curiosity of animals suddenly confronted by the unknown. "Oh, look, look," they spoke in a low, scared voices. "Whatever is the matter with her? Why is she so fat?" They had never seen a face like hers before. Had never seen a face that was not youthful and taut-skinned. A body that had ceased to be slim and upright. All these moribund sexagenarian, that means somebody in their 60s. Somebody who is between 60 years old and 70 years old. And moribund, we've already learned, means somebody ready to die. So all of these 60-year-old people who are ready to die had the appearance of childish girls. At 44, Linda seemed by contrast a monster of flaccid and distorted senility. "Isn't she awful?" came the whispered comments. "Look at her teeth." Suddenly, from under the bed, a pug-faced twin popped up between John's chair and the wall and began peering into Linda's sleeping face. "I say," he began, but his sentence ended prematurely in a squeal. Squeal is like, ee! That's like the sound a pig makes, if you've ever heard a pig. Wee, wee, wee. That's a pig squealing. So a squeal, if a person makes a squeal, it's a very high sound. Eee! The savage had seized him by the collar, lifted him clear over the chair, and with a smart box on the ears, sent him howling away. So the little twins were examining her, saying, "Oh, she's so ugly and horrible." And they're talking about the savage's mother. So he picked one up and hit him. And then they ran away. Or at least that boy ran away. But first he squealed. Eee! So the savage seized him by the collar, lifted him clear over the chair, and with a smart box to the ears, sent him howling away. His yells brought the head nurse hurrying to the rescue. "What have you been doing to him?" she demanded fiercely. "I won't have you striking the children." "Well then, keep them away from this bed." The savage's voice was trembling with indignation. Remember, indignation is when you feel angry because you're offended and you feel like you're right. So, well then, keep them away from the bed. I'm not sorry that I did that. They should leave her alone. "What are these filthy little brats doing here at all? It's disgraceful." "Disgraceful? But what do you mean? They're being death conditioned. And I tell you," she warned him truculently, "if I have any more of your interference with their conditioning, I'll send for the porters and have you thrown out." Okay, let's look at the word truculent. These are not normal words. You don't have to worry about learning them to use them. And I've already looked up that word, I can see, but I forget. Truculent, eager or quick to argue or fight. So she was ready to fight with him, ready to argue with him. The savage rose to his feet and took a couple of steps forward towards her. His movements and the expression on his face were so menacing that the nurse fell back in terror. With a great effort, he checked himself and without speaking turned away and sat down by the bed. So he was going towards her like he wanted to beat her or something, but then he checked himself, meaning like, oh, I better not do this. And he sat down. Reassured, but with a dignity that was a trifle shrill and uncertain, "I warned you," she said the nurse. "So mind." So the nurse was afraid of him because it looked like he was going to do something to her, and then he stopped and he sat down, and now the nurse was feeling more confident. And she said, "I warned you." And she says, "So mind." And if you say mind here, like if you say mind what I say, mind, that expression, mind what I say, is think about what I said and follow my instructions. That's what she means when she says, "So mind," meaning listen to what I told you. If you make any more problems, you're out. Still, she led the two inquisitive twins away and made them join in the game of Hunt the Zipper, which had been organized by one of her colleagues at the other end of the room. "Run along now and have your cup of caffeine solution, dear," she said to the other nurse. The exercise of authority restored her confidence, made her feel better. "Now, children," she called. Linda had stirred uneasily, had opened her eyes, and for a moment looked vaguely around and then once more dropped off to sleep. Sitting beside her, the savage tried hard to recapture his mood of a few minutes before. "ABC, vitamin D," he repeated to himself, as though the words were a spell that would restore the death past to life. But the spell was ineffective. Obstinate means stubborn. That's another way of saying stubborn, if you know that word. Obstinately, the beautiful memories refused to rise. There was only a hateful resurrection of jealousies and ugliness and miseries. Popeye, with the blood trickling down from his cut shoulder, and Linda, hideously asleep, and the flies buzzing round the spilt mezcal on the floor beside the bed, and the boys calling those names as she passed. Ah, no, no. He shut his eyes. He shook his head in strenuous denial of these memories. A, B, C, vitamin D. He tried to think of those times when he sat on her knees and she put her arms around him and sang, over and over, rocking him to sleep. A, B, C, vitamin D. Vitamin D, vitamin D. The Supervox Wurlitzerania had risen to a sobbing crescendo, and suddenly the verbena gave place, in the scent-circulating system, to an intense patchouli. Linda stirred, woke up, stared for a few seconds, bewilderedly, bewildered means confused, at the semi-finalists, and then lifting her face, sniffed once or twice at the newly perfumed air, and suddenly smiled. A smile of childish ecstasy. Pope, she murmured, and closed her eyes. Oh, I do so like it, I do, she sighed, and let herself sink back into the pillows. But Linda, the savage spoke imploringly, don't you know me? He had tried so hard, had done his very best. Why wouldn't she allow him to forget? He squeezed her limp hand. Limp means like very relaxed. So if your hand is limp, it's like this. If you do this, you have to exercise some kind of energy. But when you do this, when something is limp, it has no energy. It has no tension. So he squeezed her limp hand, and almost with violence, as though he would force her to come back from his dream of ignoble pleasures. I think we've had that word ignoble before, but I don't remember. Ignoble. Not honorable. Not honorable. He squeezed her limp hand almost with violence, as though he would force her to come back from this dream of ignoble pleasures. So she's half asleep, and you can hear her saying, oh, Pope, I love it, I love it. And Pope was a boy or a man that she used to sleep with in the savage village. So she's having an erotic dream, and the savage is trying to wake her up from her ignoble pleasures, her very unnoble, not very dignified pleasures. From these base and hateful memories, back into the present, back into reality, the appalling present, the awful reality, but sublime, but significant, but desperately important, precisely because of the imminence of that which has made them so fearful. Don't you know me, Linda? He felt a faint answering pressure from her hand. So she didn't speak, but she squeezed his hand. And faint means weak, so it wasn't very strong. But she squeezed his hand a little bit. All right, I'm just going to take a 1-minute break, and I will be right back. Okay? right, I'm back. Thank you for waiting. Okay, let's get back. Let's see. Her lips moved. Popeye, she whispered again, and it was as though he had had a pailful of ordure thrown in his face. A pailful. A pail is a bucket. So if you don't know what a bucket is, I guess we better take a look at that word. Because I think that's one of those words that maybe it's very common, but you may not know it. So this is a bucket, but another word for bucket is pail. A pail full of ordure. Let's see, I don't know what ordure is, so we have to look that up too. How do you spell that? Ordure. Something regarded as vile or abhorrent. It's probably a fancy word for poo. Because it says excrement or dung. And it seems to be a French word. That's why I'm pronouncing it ordure. So it seems like a pail full of ordure thrown in his face. Because that's his mother and she's dying. And he's trying to have this moment with her as she's dying. And he's holding her hand. But all she's thinking about is having sex with this man from the village where she was living. Oh, Popeye. So you can hear that. And it's like an insult. It's like a pail full of ordure thrown in his face. Anger suddenly boiled up in him, balked for a second time. The passion of his grief had found another outlet, was transformed into a passion of agonized rage. "But I'm John," he shouted. "I'm John." And in his furious misery, he actually caught her by the shoulder and shook her. Linda's eyes fluttered open. She saw him, knew him, John. But situated, the real face and real and violent hands, an imaginary world among the inward and private equivalents of patchouli and super Wurlitzer, among the transfigured memories and the strangely transposed sensations that constituted the universe of her dream. So she finally recognizes him, but she's still in this other world. She's taken some drugs. She's just hearing the music, and she's smelling the beautiful fragrances. So it's hard to recognize him through all of that. She knew him for John, her son, but fancied him an intruder into that paradisal Malpais, where she had been spending her Soma holiday with Popeye. He was angry because she liked Popeye. He was shaking her because Popeye was there in the bed, and as though there was something wrong, as though all civilized people didn't do the same. Everyone belongs to every... Her voice suddenly died in an almost inaudible, breathless croaking. Croaking, do you know croaking is the sound of a frog? That's croaking. But croaking could also be if you're sick. That could be croaking too. Everyone belongs to every... Her voice suddenly died into an almost inaudible, breathless croaking. Her mouth fell open. She made a desperate effort to fill her lungs with air, but it was as though she had forgotten how to breathe. She tried to cry out, but no sound came. Only the terror of her staring eyes revealed that she was suffering. Her hands went to her throat, and then clawed at the air. She could no longer breathe the air that for her had ceased to exist. The savage was on his feet, bent over her. "What is it, Linda? What is it?" His voice was imploring. It was as though he were begging to be reassured. The look she gave him was charged with an unspeakable terror. With terror, and it seemed to him a reproach. A reproach is when you say, you've done something bad. You're doing something bad. That's reproaching someone. So she was very scared, but she was also looking at him like, why are you acting like this? You're doing something bad. That's the reproachful part. She tried to raise herself in bed, but fell back onto the pillows. Her face was horribly distorted. The savage turned and ran up the ward. "Quick, quick," he shouted, "quick." Standing in the center of a ring of zipper-hunting twins, the head nurse looked round. The first moment's astonishment gave place almost instantly to disapproval. "Don't shout. Think of the little ones," she said, frowning. You might decondition." "But what are you doing?" He had broken through the ring. "Be careful," a child was yelling. "Quick, quick." He caught her by the sleeve and dragged her after him. "Quick, something's happening. I've killed her." By the time they were back at the end of the ward, Linda was dead. The savage stood for a moment in frozen silence and then fell on his knees beside the bed, and covering his face with his hands, he sobbed uncontrollably. Sobbing is crying very hard. That's sobbing. The nurse stood irresolute, looking now at the kneeling figure by the bed, the scandalous exhibition, and now, poor children, at the twins who had stopped their hunting of the zipper and were staring from the other end of the ward, staring with all their eyes and nostrils at the shocking scene that was being enacted round bed 20. Should she speak to him, try to bring him back to a sense of decency, remind him of where he was, of what fatal mischief he might do in these poor innocents, undoing all their wholesome death conditioning with disgusting outcry, as though death were something terrible, as though anyone mattered as much as all that? It might give them the most disastrous ideas about the subject, might upset them into reacting in the entirely wrong and utterly antisocial way. She stepped forward. She touched him on the shoulder. "Can't you behave?" she said in a low, angry voice. But looking round, she saw that half of the dozen twins were already on their feet and advancing down the ward. The circle was disintegrated. In another moment, no, the risk was too great. The whole group might be put back in 6 or 7 months in its conditioning. She hurried back towards the menaced charges. "Now who wants a chocolate eclair?" she asked in a loud, cheerful tone. "Me!" yelled the entire Bokanovsky group in chorus. Bed 20 was completely forgotten. "Oh, God, God, God," the savage kept repeating to himself in the chaos of grief and remorse that filled his mind. It was the one articulate word. "God," he whispered it aloud. "God." "Whatever is he saying?" said a voice very near, distinct and shrill through the warblings of the super Wurlitzer. The savage violently started, and uncovering his face, looked round. 5 khaki twins, each with the stump of a long eclair in his right hand, and their identical faces. You know, we've had that word stump before. I guess that's a pretty useful word. So I just want to remind you what that word stump means. This is a tree stump. That's the most common type of stump. So usually when you hear the word stump, it's related to something with a tree. The part of a tree that stays in the ground even after you cut down the tree is a stump. But We call this a stump when someone has an amputation. So this man doesn't have legs, he has stumps. You have to be careful about that because some people are very sensitive and wouldn't like you to call it a stump. But it is a stump. So it's like when something used to be long and then you cut it and there's just a little bit remaining, that's a stump. Now, if you don't know what a chocolate eclair is, let me show you a picture of that. It's a type of pastry that's very long. So if the children are standing with stumps of eclairs in their hands, that means they've eaten most of it, and there's just a little piece left. It used to be long, and now it's very short. That's why he calls it a stump. Oh God, 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 the savage kept repeating to himself. In the chaos of grief and remorse that filled his mind, it was the one articulate word, God. He whispered it aloud. God. Whatever is he saying, said a voice very near, distinct and shrill through the warblings of the super Wurlitzer. The savage violently started and, uncovering his face, looked round. 5 khaki twins, each with the stump of a long eclair in his right hand, and their identical faces, variously smeared with liquid chocolate, were standing in a row, puggily goggling at him. So, I guess you can imagine the face of a pug dog, but the eyes moving around. They met his eyes and simultaneously grinned. One of them pointed out with his eclair butt. Is she dead? He asked. So he's eating, and he's pointing with his eclair. Is she dead? Like they don't care. The savage stared at them for a moment in silence. And then in silence, he rose to his feet in silence and slowly walked towards the door. Is she dead? Repeated the inquisitive twin, trotting at his side. The savage looked down at him and, still without speaking, pushed him away. The twin fell on the floor and at once began to howl. Ah! The savage did not even look round. Wellington Cardoso is asking, is it like part of one piece or thing? Are you talking about stump? Stump is when something normally has a very long shape, but now part of it has been removed and it has a very short shape. So that's why you talk about the stump of a tree. It's like what is left. It's what is remaining of a long thing. So if you have something long like a tree and then you remove most of it and you just have this little part left, it's what remains. It's what is left or what is remaining of something long. Or if you talk about an amputation stump, you used to have long arms or long legs, but now you just have a stump. This is what is left. It used to be long and now it's short. And if you talk about eclair, you don't normally use the word stump with an eclair, but you could. You technically could, because the entire eclair is very long, and then you eat a lot of it, and you just have a little left, a little bit remaining. That could be technically an eclair stump. All right, well, that was the end of chapter 14. I think there must be only 1 or 2 chapters left, because I think we're getting very close to the end now. Or maybe it was 300. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Okay, but I will be back the same time tomorrow reading chapter 15 of Brave New World. Thank you, everybody who stayed and watched till the end, and I I hope that I see you tomorrow when we read through chapter 15. But I will see you, until then, I will see you later. Goodbye.